What are some of the biggest mistakes a self-produced artist can make, both in terms of production and business? What can artists look to develop in studio with the advent of home recording? In other words, when is it important to use a studio, and when is it not?
Oh, well, I think it's always important to use a studio. I should say, from a selfish engineering standpoint, mixing particularly, the effect of the room on microphones is pretty strong, from my point of view. Especially with singing and vocal mics. I struggle. I don't know about you, Kevin, or anybody, but I definitely struggle a bit with things that have been recorded in small rooms, like bathrooms and things in their apartment. It takes me a while to actually figure out how to make that really grow up and to sound like it was done in a place like this. Obviously, a no-brainer thing. My general rule is, if there's a microphone involved, it's going to be better in the studio. I know that maybe there always isn't big studio budget, but
it's funny. Like I've obviously a studio rat, but I've also had a lot of experiences where I've recorded in non-traditional studio settings. And sometimes that actually can be a wonderful experience. I think it's especially comforting for the artist because they often feel like, oh, it feels like home. It feels like the sofas and chairs. It just feels like everybody just relaxes and they're not so worried about the clock.
But there's a whole other set of...
But you can get around
problems.
it. I mean, they're always going to be problems.
You need to be aware of it.
Yeah, as long as you're aware what the problems are and you're willing to kind of navigate around them, then you can.
If you're able to sort of navigate,
if you can sort of, yeah,
right, just kind of.
But the question is, like, when you're
with you, maybe the kind of.
Yeah, but to Kirk's question, I think that a lot of the things is it's always, there's often too much stuff recorded.
Yes.
It's back to what we were talking about before. Too much stuff recorded, probably not arranged properly. Strip it down.
Mm-hmm.
Can it be played with as few instruments as possible? Is that interesting to you? Because when I start mixing, I actually puts the vocal up first. That's the very first thing I put up is the vocal, and then I find like whatever the main melodic instrument, and then I kind of build everything around that way. So in the beginning, you kind of know, like you've got 3 or 4 faders up, you already know if it's going to work. Mm-hmm. You kind of know, and then if that's not working, then you're really screwed. Because then you have to go back and say, there's no way I can make this work. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This question is for Kevin. I have already begun sessions with a smaller producer, engineer in a home studio session. Provided that the material is of good quality, would you ever take those files and elaborate on them in your studio?
Yes, always. I mean, if there's something very magical happening in those initial recordings, absolutely. If it's technically up to the standard, yeah. As long as it's not clicking and popping and weird artifacts on it, yeah, I would use it. Clearly, but because there's something about those initial home recordings that people do, there's a spontaneity, and it's the thing that we all aspire to in the studio. It's very revealing. It's humble, but it's revealing at the same time. So yeah, many times.
Great. Steve, how important is it to follow protocol when it comes to elements of radio play? I mean, it's length, structure, arrangement.
It is important. I mean, but I, at the end of the day, have this absolute belief that art and commerce can live hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And I think historically, I've made records that I feel, have made money, and they're a lot of them are considered good art. But say a band like Dave Matthews Band, who just play and fucking play. Oh God, it's so boring. But you have to, you have to work. You have to try. You don't want to make it too short, but you don't want to leave it. So you try and use taste to do what you feel is right. But no, I mean, without the radio, I mean, I make records for that format. I mean, we all want our music to be, I'm not, I can't survive as an art project, And also, I'm ambitious. I want to make records that are on the radio. I want to have hits, and that's, part of it all. I like ambition. Mm-hmm. It's great.
Okay, well, where do you guys see, all three of you, where do you see the future of the production going? I know Steve alluded a little bit to the speed of recording.
Yeah, as I say, for me, I think as budgets become smaller and people can't spend so much money sitting around, you can look at the history books and say, well, there were great records made before people spend 6 weeks doing an album. You know, if you're very well rehearsed and you know what you're doing and you have something good, you can you can do it. You know, as
Hard
I
Day's
say,
Night was made in a day, right?
yeah.
So,
As I say, my radio sessions that I do here, you can listen. You know, you can actually put the Goldfrapp thing that I did up to the Goldfrapp album. It just sounds so much better. You know, and that's just a beautiful sounding recording that we did here. What other ones did we do that were good? We did some good ones. You know, She and Him. I mean, that's Zooey Deschanel. Her voice is absolutely spectacular. The voice on her record is not so great, but the vocals she did downstairs were just as good as anything I've ever recorded. You know, so it can be done, but you need, you know, it's like when a boxer goes into a fight, he needs training. You know, so many people in their cycle of recording tend to make the record before they train for it. You know, and you know, and then they go out and go on tour, and by the end of the tour, they're trained, and that's when they should be making their record. Absolutely. As we know from
from
a certain band we both worked with. Yes. So yeah, that was my. I can't remember what the question.
How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Steve says. I mean, you know, if you're working with a minimal budget, and you know, which is what we're all doing these days, and you've got scant resources, you've got to be smart about how you use them. So I'd rather spend the money going into a good room and getting the sound of the room, you know, on the recording than, you know, struggling in a bedroom, even though I've done that too. So, you know, I think you gotta like just decide. Yeah. And you have to make the decision, like, you have to tell the artist, like, are they really ready to do this? Because most artists are like, you know, from independent artists to well-established artists, they always want to go in and record when they're least ready. You know, just because it's like they're excited about the prospect of making that project, and it's very hard to like just hold them back. And you don't want to be the person, the naysayer. But the reality is that we've all spent countless hours in the studio where you're going, this would be much better in 2 months' time. You know, when they actually figured out how to play it. You know, in time, in tune with feeling is not too much to ask. You know, it's really not. So I mean, there's a lot of good things that can come of what we're all going through right now. It's just, you know, a little smarter about how you marshal your resources. So.
I absolutely agree with that.
Hey, Roy, how about like the use of Logic and
The use of Logic, you mean the Apple software Logic? I like it, by the way. You know, that's a different way to make a record. So that's another thing to kind of wonder about. You ask about where do we see the future of the record making process? There are those kind of records which are sort of born in the DAW or sort of what we would know as kind of a MIDI sequence sort of thing. And that's the future of that. I think is going to be just what it is. And I think maybe coming to a place like a studio to add players to that or something like that. I don't see it changing much. I think it's in the pop market, at least from what I see, there's a good amount of that style of making records going on.